Hi, my name is Dave Shell. I'm a wood turner in Mount Joy, Pennsylvania, a small town in central PA located in Lancaster County. Today I'm going to show you something unique. I'm going to show you how I put spirals around objects that I make on the lathe. This happens to be a weed pot, and I decided to put a little spiral around it to give a little bit of extra something to sit on your counter or on your table. So let's go ahead and watch. This process does take a long time. The video isn't that long, but the process of actually doing a spiral does take maybe 6 or 7 hours from start to finish. So I'm going to show you a condensed version of how I do this, and hopefully you'll have an interest to try it on your own. The first step in making a spiral vase is to make the vase. I have a roughed out piece of Kentucky coffee tree right here. I picked it because the grain pattern I think is going to show up really nice once I do all the curves and everything else. I like to use scrap pieces of wood for this. I like to use highly figured pieces of wood. Kentucky coffee tree has a really nice grain pattern. It's a wood you don't really see that often, so I think it's really going to stand out when people see it. I have approximately a 9-inch tall vase, and I start with a bottom of about 3.5 inches, and the top is about 1.5 inches. Those are just my dimensions. I seem to like that look. You could do any kind of look you want. You could do a nice gentle slope like I do. You can have a really fat bottom, a really skinny middle, and a skinnier top. It really doesn't matter. The curve is what's really going to draw people's attention. The finish on the rough blank doesn't really matter, because as long as it's a smooth surface, relatively smooth, it doesn't have to be sanded to 220, it doesn't have to be sanded to even 180. I have mine rough sanded at 120 just to get rid of all the hills and valleys. And once you're done carving, there isn't really that much of the surface that's going to be visible anyway. It's just the very peaks of those really sharp areas. Once I have this roughed out, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to poke the hole in the middle for the vase. These are weed vases, so I'm not going to hollow out the body. I'm just going to put a nice straight hole in. And I just use these long auger bits. I have 5 different auger sizes that I go through, and these auger bits are probably 10 inches long, and I just put them in my drill chuck here, and we just slowly work through the way. I'm not going to show you any of that because I think people can figure that out. What I'm going to focus on next is how I lay everything out and get the pattern that I want to do for the curves that I want to make on the vase. Here's a rough out of my vase. I have a tenon on this end. This is the top. I have a hole drilled into the top, and there's a couple of cracks on it, but I'm not that worried about it. Kentucky coffee tree cracks a lot, and I don't even know if I'll keep this. I'm just using this for a demo. So as you can see, it's about 3.5 inches here, it's about 1.5 inches here, and it's a nice gentle slope. You do not want to take it off the lathe at this point. This is where we're going to start the indexing and laying out the spiral. But this is sanded to a 120 grit finish, and again, it doesn't have to be super fine. It just has to make sure that it's relatively smooth when you're putting your hand over it. Nothing jumps out at you. So I'm going to go ahead and start showing you how I lay out the spirals for the spiral. I'm going to show you how to make this spiral layout. I have a Jet 1236 lathe. It has an index with 12 holes in it. Some lathes have more, some have less. You can even make your own index wheel. There's videos on YouTube how to do it. I'm not going to explain how to do it now. Where you can set up as many points as you want on your index. I'm just going to use a 12. I'm going to put my index pin into the first hole. Use my tool rest. I'm going to pull down on the wood so it's consistent. And then just make a line as straight as I can along the wood. And that's just going to be a reference point. I just want to make sure I can see the line. And if not, I'll go over it twice. If the lines aren't exact, that's okay, because this is not really an exact thing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it and do one, and then do the second one, pull down on it, and do another line. And I'm going to go ahead and skip the next one, and then do the second hole again, and again pull down. So I'm going to have a fairly consistent pattern across using every 2 holes. If I wanted to, I can go back. If I think the spirals are going to be too big, go back and do every one instead of every two. Last time I did this, I kind of liked the every two, but again, I could do every one if I wanted to. And I think we're going to do one more here. So now I should have a number of lines. Let's see, we'll just number this 1. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parallel lines going across. The next thing you want to do is take your tape measure or ruler, whatever you have. This is about 10.5 inches, so we're going to start from there. We'll say 10 inches. So what I'm going to do is about every inch, I'm going to go ahead and put a line. And again, this is not exact, so you're going to be working on the exactness of it as you carve everything out. This is just really a guide. And again, you don't have to do every inch. I just happen to like this combination where I do every 2 and then 1 inch going across. For this size, when I do wands, my wands are about 14 inches long. I'll do every 1/2 inch. And then I'll do every 3 of these. So I'll have 4 spirals going up. Play around with it and see what works for you. One thing I'm going to suggest is making these lines a little bit bigger, because we're going to turn the lathe on and we're going to put these lines the whole way across, and that you'll see how we get the reference point. So if there's spots where the lines didn't go all the way around, it's a good idea to kind of at least do it when you're crossing the line, the reference line, because that's the most important. If you want to do the whole way around, you can. I'll go ahead and show it to you that way. Sometimes to save time, I'll just measure out the lines and just cross the parallel lines, because that's the most important part of this. And you don't want to press really hard with a pencil because it will leave a mark at the end. So the lighter you can go, where you can at least see it, the better. Okay, that's good. Okay, so here's where we're going to lay everything out. What you're going to do is just start with one of the reference points and then work your way around doing every one. So I'm going to take from this point here to this point here, and I'm just going to draw a line that I think is going to intersect both those points. And then I'm going to cross it so it's going up to the next line. And then again, I'm going to do the same thing for this one. And again, if they're not perfect, that's okay, because you're going to work out the details as you're carving this with your saber tooth or whatever tool you're using. So we're going to go the whole way around. And if you don't want to go all the way to the bottom, you don't have to. You can start your spiral here and go all the way up to here and end it. You can just do a little spiral right here. It's up to you how you want to do this. But what you're going to do is go around one level and then go right up to the next one and do the same thing. And then you're going to start to see the spiral form as you do this. And like I said, don't worry about perfection. You're going to drive yourself crazy if you worry about that. And as you're working this, you're going to be able to fine-tune it anyway. So if you're like me, you're going to mess it up the first time and you're going to have to go back and fix it. And as you get closer to the top, since you're getting skinnier, it's going to be easier to connect the lines. You have more flexibility in the bottom to kind of make a little pattern if you wanted to. And these lines eventually turn out to be pretty straight going all the way across. So what you're actually doing is you're actually creating, because I have 6 parallel lines, I am creating, I think, 6 spirals. So when you're carving out, you're actually carving out 6 spirals at the same time. Now this may not be the best method to do it. It's the method that works for me. There are other methods to do this. You can go on YouTube and figure it out. I kind of came up with this one just kind of playing around, seeing what would work easiest for me and the tools that I have. And if you want thinner spirals, then just make these every 1/2 of an inch instead of every inch, or every 3/4 of an inch instead of an inch. Again, when you're playing with it, you'll kind of figure out what works best for you and what thickness and height you want to make everything. So you can have a whole lot of spirals if you do every, in my case, if I do 12 parallel lines, if I use every hole in my index and make these every 1/2 of an inch, I'll have a lot of spirals going up, really tight spirals. And I might want to do that in some cases, but in this case, I kind of like the big open spirals. And I'm going to go all the way to the top on my piece. I had a little lip here to kind of end the spiral. I think it makes a nice clean transition. So as you can see, I'm close to the top here now, and these lines are getting nice and straight. And these, again, are just guidelines, so it doesn't mean this is going to be the exact way you're going to do it. This is just a guide. As you're doing it, you're going to figure out what works best and how to adjust things. Okay, so that didn't take so long. So you're probably asking, well, what do I do with all those lines? What do all those lines mean? Okay, the parallel lines you can ignore from now on. The only line you're really worried about is this spiral line that goes all the way around. So the first time I did this, I got confused and I actually carved out the spiral line. But what you really want to do is you want to carve out the stuff that's in between the spiral lines. So these lines here are going to be the ridges that go all the way around the piece. Keep that in mind. Now again, it doesn't really matter how you do this. Some people will use a hand tool and go ahead and do it. I like to use a Dremel with a saber-tooth top. If anyone has ever seen saber-tooth pieces, let me find them. I just put mine away. I have 2 different saber-tooths I like to use. So for my wands, I like to use these really skinny, it's probably just over 1/8 of an inch, I guess. Maybe it's, yeah, 3/32 or something like that. This is what I'll use for really skinny pieces. Of course, this is too small for this. For this piece, I like to use these bigger ones. They're kind of dirty. I haven't cleaned them off. I do have on order some bigger ones than this. I think they're 3/8 inch. As I do more of these, the 3/8 one will actually clean this out a lot quicker. But either one of these I like to use. These are carbide tipped, so they're really great tools. They kind of last a long time as long as you don't rub them against metal. And I just clean them off with like a brass brush. So I'm going to use the rounded one, and then I'll end up using this one. I'll use this one to rough out most of it, and then I'll use this one to kind of refine things. I won't be using this one. So the next thing is I'm going to show you how to go ahead and start carving out some of these lines. Getting ready to go ahead and carve the lines. Before I do this, I will tell you this is a very long process. Something like this is going to take me maybe 4 or 5 hours from start to finish, and that includes sanding it and finishing it and everything else, but most of the time is sanding and routing out with my Dremel. So I will take my index pin and I will put my index pin in the index to prevent this from moving around a lot. What I will do is I will start probably with this one right here, and I'll try and do a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit of this to kind of show you what's going to happen. You could do one of these at a time just so you don't get confused. I've done a number of these, so I can easily bounce between the lines. I kind of know what I'm doing. And then for the Dremel, you just kind of keep it at a speed that you can control. It is very easy for the Dremel to bounce and then wipe out one of your lines. I've done that a lot too. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to start on a 3 or a 4 and then use 2 hands. So I'll use 2 hands to control the Dremel, and then when I'm ready, I don't want to go down too far where it's going to be unstable or too far this way. I kind of want to do it right on the top. And then what I'll do is I will move my index, and then I'll just kind of go, and I try and get to do 3 at a time, 2 or 3 at a time. I could just go right down the line and do it, but I like to just do a couple at a time and kind of see how it's going. So what I do first is I really go for the center and make sure I have a pretty good center line. As far as how deep you want to go, again, that's your call. Try and get them as consistent as you can because it makes it look nicer. But if you can't get it consistent the first time, don't worry about it. People are really going to like it because that ridge is something you don't really see in a lot of things. So I'm going to go ahead and start it. See what I mean about the Dremel slipping? Now luckily that didn't slip too far and it didn't take out too much of the line, but I could tell I'm going down too far, so I'm going to go ahead and just move to the next. This will create a lot of dust, so make sure you have some kind of face protection on and dust mask. I don't because I'm going to be able to talk to you guys. Okay, so you could see as I'm doing this how deep these are getting. These are maybe 1/8 of an inch right now, and I try and keep these consistent. You could see that I'm not going all the way up to the line. I don't like to go right up to the line in the very first pass. I like to do one pass and then come back and do another pass and then worry about getting really close to the line when I'm doing my sanding. So I'll do the deep part first, and then I'll come back and I'll get closer to the line and kind of scoop it out a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and worry about sanding it to get really close to the line. And again, you see these lines are just guides. As you're sanding and doing this, you'll be able to refine it as close as you want. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more. Another thing I want to stress is don't press too hard on the tool. Let the tool do the work. These saber tooths, they're super sharp and they're really easy to work with. But if you press too hard, you're going to lose control. Here you can see I kind of nicked it a little bit again too. I'm not worried about it because as I sand it, that'll all sand out. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and work on more of this. And the next time I show you, I'm going to have all this carved out so you guys can actually see what it looks like once all these are carved out. Alright, I am done doing the first stage of carving. And here's what you get. So you can follow one spiral the whole way down with your finger. And you can see that it goes one big line the whole way down to the bottom. And you actually do 6 of those, or 5 of those. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I think you do 5 of them. And you can see I didn't get too close to the line. So there's still a lot of space in the line here. So what I did was I just made the initial cut to gauge a depth and to kind of go off of. And again, it's not going to be your final because you're going to be playing with this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the square saber tooth tool, because I think you can control it a little bit better once it's in the cut. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of round these out a little bit more, get closer to the line, and then I'm going to go ahead and start sanding it. So that's pretty much all you do, is you get really close. You get a center line in the beginning, you get closer with this one, and then you can use, what I like to use first are these little Dremel sanding discs. These little round Dremels, because they kind of fit right in there and they allow you to go back and forth. You could just use regular sandpaper if you want. You can also use a tool like one of these. If you're using Dremels, these are the stones. The stones will also help smooth it out, but I think it burns the wood a little bit, so I don't like to use them. But you can experiment with it, and if you can get a good touch on it. You could also use these little flappy sanders that come with the Dremel. But I just like using these little round ones because they're cheap and they're easy to replace. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what it's like using this next tool. This is the square Dremel instead of the round one. And let me make sure I lock this down on my index. Okay, so right now you can see I'm that far away from the line. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how close I get with this. And again, I'm doing this really, really light. I'm letting the tool do all the work. And then I can kind of rough out the curve that I want to put in there. So as you do it, you're going to get much better at it. The first time I did it, it was really, really rough. But I've done a couple of these. So as you can see now, I'm getting really close to that line. I'm going to stay about that far from the line as all the way down if I can. And then I'm just going to go ahead and use my sander. And as I sand, I'll be able to go as close to that line as I want, or I could just make my line. So that's why the lines are really just a guide. Because as you sand it, you may get a loose piece of wood here. You might want to sand a little bit more. As long as you're going to, at the end, you're going to get a nice point that goes along this line as a guide. But as you can see with this square one, I can take out a lot more wood, and I can actually refine the curve a little bit more and get it actually looking like a really nice OG kind of spiral. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these, and then I will show you what it looks like after I'm done using this tool, and see how close it gets. Okay, so about 2 hours later with my Dremel, I finally got through and did the rough carve on all this stuff. So this was the bit I was using again. It was the square bit. It's I guess it's about a 1/4 inch would be. And all I did was go straight down and carve each of these out. They are all relatively uniform, I would say, maybe less than a 1/4 inch deep, I would say. But you can see, if you can see really good, I think you can see it good on the internet. I pretty much kept to the lines. You could see where the lines are, and I did about 1/16 of an inch on either side of the lines. Now as you do this, you'll be able to get closer and closer to the lines. Don't worry about getting really close your first time you do this. Worry about getting the outside relatively the same thickness. It doesn't matter how thick it is. The thinner it is, the more crisp the line will be. What I'm going to do now is, I don't know if you can tell, but it is very rough from using this. And I think Kentucky Coffee Tree, it's just a little rougher than normal because of the grain pattern. But you can see kind of why I chose this wood. It has a really, really nice grain pattern. And that's what I'm going to use for the vase. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the rounded bit, and I'm just going to go ahead and maybe get in here and try and make it as smooth as I can. And then I'm going to go ahead and start sanding with the Dremel and the sandpaper circle, and start sanding that out. Once I have that sanded out, I'm going to go ahead and sand by hand, and I'll go through all my grits from 150 all the way up to 500, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish with some water locks because I really like the way that finishes. But that's it for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and get all this sawdust off me, and I'll come back the next day and I'll start sanding and show you how that looks. Now I'm ready to go ahead and do the sanding. I'm just realizing how bad the lighting is in my shop for videos. Okay, so I'm using these little round sanding discs on my Dremel. I don't know what grit they are. I think they're 80 grit or 100 grit. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to go through all the grits anyway, but this is just for roughing out. So what I'm going to do, luckily these sanding discs fit right into the measurement that I made for these spirals. If it was too thin, then I would just start by hand, or there's even a smaller Dremel disc that fits in here to do the, I guess it's about a 1/4 inch spiral. But I'm just going to turn it on and slowly go through here and sand. What I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to be sanding the whole inside as smooth as I can, and I'm also going to be working on refining these tips. So what I want to have after this sanding is something very close to a sharp, as sharp as you want to make it, a sharp ridge right here with the sanding on the inside nice and smooth. So I'll just go right down the line, flip it around, keep doing it, and this will take probably another hour to do this. Depending on how fine you want to get with your sanding, I really suggest taking some time doing this first one, because the smoother this is for the first one, the easier it is to go through the grits. The rest of the grits I'm going to do by hand. So I'm just going to actually hand sand all of these from, I'm going to go 150 to 180 to 220. I think I have some 340 here, and then 500 and maybe even 600 or 800 depending on how smooth I want to make it. And we'll see how it turns out. So I'm going to just go ahead and show you a little bit of how I do this just to give you the idea of it. Then I'll turn the video off because I don't want to show you everything. It'll be boring. And then I'll show you what it'll look like once it's all sanded. Oh, another trick. When you're sanding with a Dremel, don't put it all the way up. You're going to burn the wood. So I just do it on a 2 or a 3 at most. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm really starting to refine this tip. So it's getting smoother and smoother, and it's almost coming to a point. I'll get it to where I feel comfortable, and then when I hand sand, I'll really refine it with the 150, the 180, and then the 220. So that's what I'll be doing for the rest of this, and I'll show you when it's done. Now I completed the first round of sanding with the Dremel, and you can see that these flutes here, I guess you would call them, are nice, and they're getting thinner. There are some that are pointy right now. There are some that are on their way to being pointy, but you can see how nice and smooth the inside is. And what I'm going to start doing now is I'm actually going to take some sandpaper and actually just sand by hand the whole way around. This is the most tedious part. You probably want to keep another hour to an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours, depending on how rough your inside is and how smooth your wood is and what type of wood you have. I'm using Kentucky Coffee Tree. This sands very easily, so I don't think I'm going to spend more than an hour and a half or so to sand this. And it seems like a lot of time, and really it is a lot of time. If I had Dremels that would take me up to 220 and 350, I would rather do that. But the sanding by the hand actually gives you a lot more control, and then you can refine all these lines to get them as sharp as you want. One thing I do want to tell you is that when it gets to the bottom over here, I don't worry too much about the bottom because I'm actually going to round it off a little bit. So if there are some parts here that didn't sand that well, or maybe you didn't get to the edge or it chipped off at the end, I wouldn't worry about it. You can always take a gouge and just round it off a little bit and smooth it out. So I'm going to go ahead and start sanding, and then I'll show you what it looks like after I am done sanding maybe 150 or 180, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done with all the sanding. So let me just show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take, let me see, grab some sandpaper here. So what I do is I take a small piece of sandpaper and I make it into a tube. And I think it's easier to go ahead and sand this way. So you actually just sand right in here. And turning the sandpaper sideways, you can go ahead and get up on these flutes and actually thin them out. And this is the best way of thinning them out. And what I do for sanding, normally I would just go right down and do it, but when I sand an entire flute. So I'll start here, I'll sand the inside, and I'll just keep going around that same flute. And then you can really tell which flutes you're in and which ones you're not. If you sand and then leave for the day, I just like to put a piece of sandpaper there and walk away, and then I know what flute I was in. That's just my little trick. You can do whatever you want. So we're going to go ahead and start sanding. The reason I like this is because you can sand and then you can uncurl it and get to another part, so you don't waste as much sandpaper. So we're going to go ahead and again, just I think this is what I started in, and just start sanding, get all those tool marks out. If you burn any of the wood, Kentucky Coffee Tree burns pretty easily. I did go a little bit higher than I wanted to on my Dremel in some spots. So you can see that when you sand this way, you can really start, and let me just sharpen one of these up a little bit. So if you don't get them as sharp as you want, just go a little bit along the side and just smooth it out. And before you know it, you have a nice little sharp peak right there. And then you just do that the whole way down. So it'll take a little bit of time. Put some music on, drink your favorite beverage of choice, and just sand your life away for the next couple of hours. And I'll show you what it looks like. I'm done sanding all the way up to 500 grit, and you can see hopefully that they're very clean edges. So sharp I almost thought I cut my finger on one of them. So what I did was I just took 500 grit sandpaper and just rubbed it along the edge just so the edges aren't too sharp. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to part it off here at the end. What I like to do is I just like to make a small curve at the end and then just part it off at the bottom with a flat bottom. And I'm going to cover this with water locks. I'll put a couple of coats of water locks on it, And if you're going to finish this, the best thing I found is to just have a dowel rod around, and then use a dowel rod that you can put into the hole, and use that to just hold your piece as you finish it. You could finish it on the lathe, but I like to part it off first before I finish it. So I'll show you the final piece once I'm done with it. Hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Alright everybody, so that was a process on how you do this. Again, it looked like a short video, but it actually took, I think, all total 6.5 hours to do this piece. This is the final piece right here. This is my Kentucky coffee tree. It is about, let me get a tape measure here. So this is about 9.5 inches, and on the bottom it is about 3.5 inches, and across the top just 1.25 inches. So I did have to part off the bottom a little bit shorter than what I wanted to. When I started to part off the bottom, it did crack a little bit, so I had to take a little bit more wood off than I wanted. So here you go. This is Kentucky coffee tree. This is finished with water locks. Those of you who ever used it, let me get this in front of the screen here. So I chose Kentucky coffee tree because I really like the wood grain. And normally it's a pretty plain wood grain, but there is a lot of distinct rings in Kentucky coffee tree, so I really liked it. I thought it turned out really well in this piece. And it just so happened that this was a small crotch piece. There's a branch that would have come out here, and then the bottom there was a branch. So there is a little bit of feathering right in this area, which gives it a little bit of a unique thing. So I'm going to go ahead and put pictures of this on Instagram and Facebook. Go ahead and follow me on either one of those that you see at the bottom of your screen, and I'll make more videos. Let me know if you guys like this. I'm going to do another one, I think, in black walnut and see how that turns out. Alright, see you guys. Thanks for watching.